When I was 15, my father and stepmother locked me alone in the house. They took my mother's love, my dog, even my room. I was invisible, until my grandparents arrived and gave me back everything, including my freedom. I still remember the sound the earth made when it swallowed my mother. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a dull, final thud, soil against wood, like the world closing its mouth and deciding it had taken enough. I was 7 years old. Small enough that my black dress brushed the backs of my knees, small enough that my fingers disappeared when I wrapped them around my grandmother's hand. But old enough to understand that something irreversible was happening. Old enough to know that when the coffin went down, my mother wasn't coming back up. The cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts, was soaked with rain. Gray clouds hung low, pressing down on us like a ceiling. Lilies surrounded the grave, their sweet scent heavy enough to make my stomach turn. Adults murmured prayers I didn't understand. Umbrellas shuddered in the wind. I didn't hear any of it. I watched my grandmother. She had always been unbreakable to me, tall, straight-backed, hair always perfectly pinned, a woman who spoke softly but carried authority like a second skin. That day, she was none of those things. She stood at the edge of the grave, clutching the damp soil with trembling fingers, rocking back and forth like the ground might open and return what it had taken. "You were too young," she whispered. "You left her too soon. How is she supposed to live without you?" Her voice cracked, then shattered. The sound tore through me harder than the rain ever could. I squeezed her hand tighter, trying to anchor her, trying to remind her I was there. But her grief was enormous, a living thing that swallowed everything around it. I could have vanished right then and no one would have noticed. People looked at me with pity. Soft eyes. Tight smiles. No one knelt down. No one asked if I was okay. That was the first day I understood something important. Grief doesn't always bring people together. Sometimes it makes you disappear. My mother had been the center of my world. She was warmth and laughter and late-night stories whispered under blankets. She smelled like vanilla lotion and clean laundry. When thunderstorms rattled the windows, she pulled me close and promised the noise couldn't hurt us. She was also the one who gave me Daisy. A golden spaniel with floppy ears and too much energy, Daisy bounded into our lives one Saturday morning when I was 5. She slept at the foot of my bed, guarded my secrets, and licked my tears when I cried over scraped knees or bad dreams. "She'll always be with you," my mother said, watching us play. "Even when I can't be." At the time, I laughed. I didn't know she was preparing me. After the funeral, the house changed. Not all at once. Not obviously. At first, it was just quieter. My father moved through rooms like a ghost, his eyes hollow, his voice distant. Meals were eaten in silence. Daisy whined at night, confused by my mother's absence, pacing the hallway as if waiting for footsteps that never came. My grandparents tried to help. They visited often, brought food, stayed late. My grandmother brushed my hair before bed and kissed my forehead a little longer than necessary. My grandfather checked the locks twice before leaving, his eyes lingering on me with concern he didn't yet have words for. Then, less than a year later, my father told me he had met someone. Her name was Claudia. "She makes me feel less alone," he said, rubbing his temples. "She has 2 boys. I think it could be good for us." I nodded because that's what good daughters do. I didn't know that was the moment my childhood began slipping through my fingers. Claudia arrived in our lives wrapped in perfume and practiced smiles. She hugged me tightly the first time we met, pressing her cheek to the top of my head. "Oh, sweetheart," she said loudly, so my father could hear. "We're going to be such a happy family." Her sons stood behind her, teenagers with sharp eyes and crooked grins. They looked at me the way boys look at insects they haven't decided whether to crush yet. At first, Claudia played her role perfectly. She praised my manners, complimented my schoolwork, told my grandparents how resilient I was. My father beamed whenever she spoke, like her approval restored something broken inside him. But masks are heavy things. They slip. The first thing Claudia took from me was Daisy. "She sheds everywhere," Claudia complained one afternoon while my father was at work. "This isn't hygienic." I hugged Daisy tighter, my heart racing. "She sleeps in my room. She doesn't bother anyone." Claudia smiled, thin and sharp. "You don't get to decide anymore." A stranger came to the gate with a leash. I screamed. I begged. I clung to Daisy's fur until my fingers hurt. Claudia pried me away with surprising strength, her nails digging into my wrist. "She'll be better off," she said coldly. The gate closed. Daisy was gone. My father came home to silence and tear-swollen eyes. "It's done," Claudia said gently. "For the best." I learned something else that day. Things can be taken from you forever, and no one will ask your permission. But Claudia wasn't finished. Not even close. After Daisy was taken, something in me went quiet. I still spoke when spoken to. I still went to school, did my homework, nodded at the right moments. But the part of me that believed things could get better folded inward, like a letter never meant to be sent. Claudia noticed. She always noticed. Cruel people have a way of sensing when someone is shrinking. It tells them where to press. The room came next. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary day that gives no warning. I came home from school to find my door open and my things stacked in uneven boxes along the hallway. My pink curtains, the ones my mother had sewn by hand, lay folded on the floor. My bookshelf was half empty. My bedspread was gone. I stood there, backpack slipping from my shoulder. "What's happening?" I asked. Claudia appeared behind me, wiping her hands on a dish towel like she'd just finished cleaning up a mess. "The boys need more space," she said. "They're growing. You understand." My throat tightened. "This is my room." She tilted her head, studying me. She corrected. "You'll be upstairs now." Upstairs meant the attic. I had only been there a handful of times. A narrow staircase leading to a slanted ceiling, dust thick in the air, a single window so small it barely let light in. It smelled like old wood and forgotten things. I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream that my mother had chosen that room for me, that she had painted the walls herself, that Daisy used to curl up at my feet every night. But something about Claudia's eyes stopped me. They weren't angry. They were satisfied. The attic became my world. In summer, it trapped heat like a sealed box. In winter, the cold crept through the walls and settled into my bones. The floorboards creaked with every step, announcing my movements to the entire house. There was no lock on the door. At night, I lay awake listening to the sounds below me, laughter from the living room, television noise, plates clinking during dinners I was rarely invited to. Sometimes, I pressed my ear to the floor, just to feel connected to something. School was no refuge. I went to a public middle school a few miles away, the kind with cracked sidewalks and crowded classrooms. Teachers were tired. Counselors were overwhelmed. Kids learned early how to disappear in plain sight. I did it well. My clothes grew plainer. My lunches grew smaller. When teachers asked if everything was okay at home, I nodded automatically. What was I supposed to say? That my stepmother smiled in front of others but turned into ice behind closed doors? That my stepbrothers rifled through my things and laughed when I cried? That my father looked through me like I was a reminder of something he wanted to forget? I learned to swallow my words. Claudia made sure I remembered my place. "You eat too much," she'd say, pushing my plate away. "You don't need new shoes. Those are fine. Be grateful. Some children don't even have parents." Grateful. The word became her favorite weapon. If I spoke too loudly, she snapped. If I stayed quiet, she accused me of sulking. If I cried, she called me manipulative. And my father believed her. Every time. The boys grew bolder as the years passed. They took my books and hid them. Snapped the straps of my backpack. Once, one of them shoved me against the wall hard enough to knock the air out of my lungs. "Accident," he said, grinning. "I told my father." He sighed, rubbing his face. "They're just kids. You need to stop exaggerating." I stopped telling him anything after that. What Claudia didn't realize, what she couldn't see past her contempt, was that my mother had planned for me. She had left everything in a trust. I didn't know the details then. Only fragments overheard during hushed conversations between adults. My grandparents had insisted on it, I later learned. An irrevocable trust, overseen by a lawyer and protected until I turned 18. Claudia knew too. I could see it in the way her eyes lingered on me when she thought I wasn't looking. In the way she asked pointed questions about future arrangements and responsibilities. Her kindness disappeared completely after that. By the time I turned 14, I barely recognized myself. I was thin, quiet, always tired. At night, I clutched my mother's embroidered pillow, the only thing Claudia hadn't thrown away, and whispered into the dark. "I'm still here," I told myself. "I'm still here." Sometimes, I imagined Daisy curled beside me, warm and solid, reminding me I wasn't alone. Sometimes, that was the only thing that kept me breathing. The breaking point came the summer I turned 15. My father announced the vacation over dinner, his voice lighter than I'd heard in years. "Europe," he said. 2 weeks. I forced a smile, my stomach sinking. Claudia didn't look at me. "You'll stay here," she said casually. "You're old enough to manage yourself." Something in her tone made my skin prickle. The morning they left, Claudia stood in the doorway, keys in hand. "You will not leave this house," she said. "You will not touch anything that doesn't belong to you. And you will be grateful." The door closed. The lock turned. And I was alone. At first, I told myself it was temporary. That they would be back before nightfall. That Claudia wouldn't really leave me like this. That my father would remember me at the last moment and turn the car around. I sat on the couch with my backpack still on, listening to the house settle around me. Hours passed. The sun slid lower in the sky, light stretching across the living room floor before fading completely. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, pressing against my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat. By the time darkness filled the house, I understood the truth. They weren't coming back. The first night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me sit up, heart pounding. I checked the doors twice, then 3 times. Locked. All of them. The windows too. Claudia had been thorough. In the kitchen, the refrigerator was almost empty. A half carton of milk. Condiments. A few slices of bread growing stale in a plastic bag. No fresh food. No money left behind. I ate 1 slice of bread and told myself to save the rest. The second day was worse. Hunger gnawed at me like a living thing. My head ached. My legs felt weak. I tried distracting myself with schoolwork, but the words blurred together. I paced the house, counting my steps, listening for sounds outside. Footsteps, voices, anything. Nothing. By afternoon, fear crept in. What if something happened to me? What if I got sick? What if no one noticed? I thought about my grandparents, about how my grandmother always insisted I call when I got home from school, how my grandfather asked too many questions because he cared too much. I realized then that Claudia hadn't just left me behind. She had isolated me. That night, I slept in my clothes, curled on the attic mattress, hugging my pillow so tightly my arms ached. I whispered into the darkness. Please, I said, to my mother, to anyone. Please don't let me disappear. By the 3rd day, I could barely stand. I drank water from the sink and ate the last slice of bread. My hands shook as I tried to ration what little I had left. My stomach cramped painfully. I sat by the front door, staring at it like it might open on its own. That was when the knock came. Sharp. Urgent. I froze. No one ever knocked. Ilara. My grandmother's voice cut through the silence like a lifeline. I scrambled to my feet, legs buckling beneath me. I ran to the window and pulled back the curtain. They were there. My grandparents stood on the porch, worry etched deep into their faces. My grandmother's hand flew to her mouth when she saw me. Oh my God, she breathed. Open the door. I tried. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys twice before unlocking it. The moment the door opened, my grandmother rushed forward and pulled me into her arms. She smelled like lavender and home. I broke. Years of swallowed fear and silence poured out of me in sobs that shook my entire body. I clung to her coat, gasping for air. They left me, I cried. They locked the door. There's no food. I didn't know if anyone would come. My grandfather's face darkened with a fury I had never seen before. They did what? He demanded. They didn't leave that night. They walked through the house slowly, methodically. They opened the pantry, checked the refrigerator, climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. My grandmother pressed her lips together, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You were sleeping here? She asked. I nodded. That was when I saw something shift inside them. Guilt, rage, resolve, all tangled together. We failed you, my grandmother whispered. But we won't again. When my father and Claudia returned days later, laughing and carrying souvenirs, the house was quiet. They froze when they saw us sitting at the dining table. My grandfather stood. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of something final. This ends today. Claudia's smile slipped. For a moment, no one moved. My father's smile faded slowly, confusion flickering across his face as he took in the scene, me seated between my grandparents, my grandmother's arm wrapped protectively around my shoulders, my grandfather standing like a wall in front of us. What's going on? My father asked. His voice wavered, unsure. Claudia recovered first. Her expression snapped back into place, warm and rehearsed. Oh, she laughed lightly. You didn't tell me your parents were coming by. My grandfather didn't answer her. He looked directly at my father. We know you left your daughter locked in this house without food, he said evenly. 4 days. The words seemed to drain the color from my father's face. That's not, he started. My grandmother cut him off, her voice trembling with fury. I found her weak, hungry, and alone, sleeping in the attic like an unwanted thing. Do not insult us by pretending this is a misunderstanding. Claudia's eyes flashed. She's exaggerating, she said sharply. She's always been dramatic. Something inside me snapped. No, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, steady, loud, impossible to ignore. You told me I wasn't allowed to leave. You locked the door. There was no food. Silence fell like a blade. My father stared at me, truly seeing me for the first time in years. His mouth opened, then closed again. My grandfather stepped forward. "We are calling our lawyer," he said. "And Child Protective Services." That was when Claudia's mask finally cracked. "You can't do that," she hissed. "This is our family business." "This," my grandmother said coldly, "is abuse." The next few days passed in a blur. A CPS social worker came to the house, a woman with kind eyes and a clipboard that never left her hands. She asked questions gently but thoroughly. She photographed the attic, the empty pantry. The bruises I hadn't realized were visible. For the first time, someone listened without interrupting me. I told her everything. My father tried to apologize. He stood in the doorway of the guest room where I stayed with my grandparents that night, his eyes red. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear I didn't know." I wanted to believe him, but all I could think about were the times I had tried to tell him, the bruises, the hunger, the fear, and how he had chosen not to see. "I did know," I said quietly. "You just didn't listen." He flinched. Claudia didn't apologize. She grew colder, sharper, openly hostile. She glared at me whenever she thought no one was watching. When the CPS worker returned with follow-up questions, Claudia refused to cooperate. "You're turning her against us," she snapped. The worker didn't rise to the bait. "Our job is to ensure the child's safety," she said calmly. I watched Claudia's hands curl into fists. The custody process moved quickly after that. My grandparents filed an emergency petition with the Massachusetts Family Court. Temporary custody was granted within days. I was allowed to leave the house under supervision, escorted by my grandparents. Packing my things felt unreal. I took my books, my clothes, my mother's pillow. I didn't take anything else. As I walked out the door, Claudia stood in the hallway, arms crossed. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "You owe us." I met her gaze. "No," I said. "You owe me my childhood." At my grandparents' house, I slept through the night for the first time in years. The morning of the hearing, I sat in the car with my grandparents. Sunlight slanted across the dashboard, but it did nothing to warm the cold pit in my stomach. "Are you ready, Elara?" my grandmother asked, her hand resting gently on mine. I nodded. I didn't feel ready. I had been through so much, yet somehow I knew the battle hadn't even begun. My grandfather's hand tightened on the steering wheel. "They took so much from you. Today we make them face it." I drew in a shaky breath. I tried to imagine the courtroom as anything but a battlefield, but the thought faltered. The courtroom in Boston was austere. High ceilings, polished wood, and the subtle scent of paper and polish. People shuffled in and out, murmuring quietly. At the front sat the judge, a woman with a lined face but piercing eyes. Claudia and her lawyer were already there. Claudia's son sat stiffly behind her, faces blank, as though they were unwilling participants in a scene they had orchestrated. My father followed them, looking smaller than he had in years, his hands trembling as he held the strap of his briefcase. I felt a flash of anger, at him, at her, at the system that had let it all happen. But I also felt a flicker of hope. The proceedings began. My grandparents' lawyer spoke first. He laid out everything, the locked doors, the starvation, the neglect. He presented the photos, the social worker's notes, affidavits from my school counselor, and even a log of my stepbrother's bullying. Claudia's lawyer tried to undermine me. "She's manipulative," he said, waving a hand toward me. "A child can be dramatic. Perhaps this is exaggeration for attention." I wanted to stand and scream. Instead, I listened, silent but steady, letting the truth speak for itself. When the judge called my name, I stood. "State your full name and age," the court clerk said. "Elara Thompson," I said. My voice quivered, but I forced it to stay loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm 15. "Do you wish to testify about your living situation?" the judge asked. I nodded. I stepped forward and looked at Claudia. She was staring at me, eyes narrowing, but I didn't flinch. I was locked in my house when my father and stepmother went on vacation. I began. I had almost no food. I slept in the attic. They took my dog, my room. They tried to make me invisible. Nobody listened to me. I was alone, afraid, hungry, and it wasn't the first time. I swallowed. I've been telling my father for years, but he didn't see. Claudia, she made sure I had nothing. The judge listened quietly, pen in hand. Evidence followed evidence. My grandparents presented bank statements showing attempts Claudia made to influence or access the trust. Emails and texts where she pressured my father. Records from school and the pediatrician documenting neglect. Claudia sat rigid, her mask of calm slowly cracking with every word. "You're overreacting," she finally snapped at one point, pointing at me. "You're lying. This is a child's tantrum dressed up as a story." The judge didn't respond immediately. She let the room sit in silence, letting the truth settle over the air like dust. Then my father spoke. He looked at me, then at Claudia. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said. His voice shook. I didn't know how bad it was. I met his eyes. You did know, I said. You just chose not to see. Something in him shifted. The color drained from his face. Claudia's jaw tightened beside him. By the afternoon, the hearing turned toward the trust fund and custody. My grandparents' lawyer explained that I was legally entitled to the inheritance my mother had left, securely in trust, protected until I turned 18. Any attempt by Claudia to access it without my consent would be illegal. Claudia's lawyer attempted to argue that I was too emotionally unstable to inherit responsibly, a claim that made my stomach twist. The judge leaned forward. Miss Thompson, she said, you've demonstrated courage and clarity beyond your years. This court is confident in your ability to manage your inheritance with the guidance of your legal guardians. A quiet murmur ran through the room. Claudia's eyes blazed with hatred. My father's mouth hung open. Finally, the judge made her ruling. Custody would be transferred permanently to my grandparents. Claudia and her sons were to have supervised visitation at most, under strict conditions. Any attempt to interfere with the trust would result in immediate legal action. Relief washed over me like a wave. Tears blurred my vision. I could finally breathe. My grandmother reached across the table, holding my hand. You're safe now, she whispered. I nodded. I was safe. And I was no longer invisible. The ride home with my grandparents felt surreal. The car hummed along the Massachusetts streets, trees blurring past the windows, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel afraid. I looked at my grandmother, who drove with a calm focus that somehow made the world feel safer, and my grandfather beside her, rigid and quiet but radiating the kind of protection I had only ever dreamed of. You're ours now, my grandmother said softly, brushing my hair off my forehead. We will never let them hurt you again. I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. When we arrived, the house seemed almost magical, familiar, warm, alive. It smelled of home, not authority or cold perfection like Claudia's domain. My bedroom had been prepared exactly as I liked it, with soft curtains, books neatly arranged, and a bed that felt like it had been waiting for me. I sat on the edge of the bed, running my fingers over the quilt my grandmother had sewn. Every stitch, every pattern, reminded me of the small comforts my mother had tried to leave behind, proof that love could survive, even through cruelty. Claudia's influence didn't disappear overnight. The first week, I received a certified letter from her lawyer. Threats. Empty accusations. Attempts to challenge the custody ruling. My grandparents handled it with quiet fury. Every word was met with proper legal response, every attempt documented. I didn't read the letters. I didn't need to. My life was no longer hers to control. My father, however, lingered on the edges. He came to the house once, awkwardly, holding flowers. His eyes were red, haunted. Ilara, he began, shifting from foot to foot. I didn't know how badly things had gotten. I didn't answer immediately. I had spent years imagining this moment, the apology I wanted, the words that could make it all better. But no words could erase what I had lived through. Finally, I said, you did know. You just didn't act. He flinched. I failed you. Yes, I said. You did. He left shortly after, quietly, leaving behind a room filled with silence. I didn't hate him. Not completely. But I had no illusions. He was part of the past, not the future. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, I began to rebuild. I claimed the things Claudia had tried to erase. My books, my music, my small treasures. My grandparents helped me make the attic into a small study room, a safe space where I could read, write, and dream. Every morning, I would wake, stretch, and remember Daisy, the dog who had been my first companion, my first anchor. I knew she was gone, but her memory lingered in the small, comforting routines I rebuilt for myself. School became different too. I no longer tried to hide. I raised my hand in class. I laughed with friends. I shared pieces of myself I had hidden for years. Teachers noticed the change, a quiet strength that radiated even in the smallest gestures. Some days, I still had nightmares. I still woke up remembering the locked doors, the hunger, the isolation. But when they came, I whispered to myself like I had whispered to Daisy. I am safe. I am seen. I am alive. And I was. Claudia's final attempt to regain control came months later. She showed up at the courthouse again, demanding a review of the custody arrangement. My grandparents were ready. The lawyer presented records of her ongoing intimidation attempts, her prior neglect, her unsuccessful petitions. The judge, unsurprisingly, sided firmly with my grandparents. The visitation rights were tightened. Any attempt to contact me outside the court-approved schedule would result in immediate legal consequences. It was over. For For the first time since my mother's death, I felt a sense of possibility. The walls of my grandparents' house weren't just walls. They were a fortress. A sanctuary. They were proof that love could protect, even when the world had been cruel. I still grieved. I still missed my mother, still missed Daisy. But the grief no longer defined me. It was a part of me, yes, but no longer a cage. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer powerless. This was my life. Mine to live, mine to shape, mine to protect. The day I turned 18, I walked into the lawyer's office with my grandparents at my side. The papers were thick, official, and intimidating, the culmination of years of planning my mother had left behind. The irrevocable trust she had set up for me was finally mine to access. I ran my fingers over the folder, feeling the weight of what it represented. Not just money, but freedom. Security. A voice that could no longer be ignored. Claudia, of course, had tried one last time. A week before my birthday, she called my father, demanding to know what she could claim, threatening lawsuits, claiming emotional instability, all in an attempt to intimidate me. I didn't answer. My grandparents dealt with it through our lawyer. Every letter, every call, every thinly veiled threat was recorded and filed. There was no loophole for her to exploit. When I signed the final documents, I felt something I hadn't in years. Power. Not the cruel, destructive kind Claudia wielded. The steady, unshakable kind that comes from knowing you survived everything meant to break you. After the signing, I went home with my grandparents. The house felt lighter somehow. I walked through the rooms I had once been locked out of. My old bedroom, now completely restored, seemed like a place where time had waited for me. I ran my hands along the shelves, tracing the familiar grooves where my mother had arranged her books. For a long time, I simply stood there, letting myself imagine what life could be like now that the chains of my past were fully behind me. Claudia's attempts to interfere had left her exposed. The courts had documented her abuse, her neglect, and her manipulations. Any effort to challenge the trust now would be met with swift consequences. She had lost. Her sons had grown up with cruelty as a lesson, and even they could no longer affect my life. I realized finally that the people who tried to erase me, to strip me of everything, had only delayed the inevitable. They could not undo my mother's love, my grandparents' protection, or the life I was destined to reclaim. The process of reclaiming my life was gradual but powerful. I enrolled in college near home, pursuing something my mother had always encouraged: creative writing. Every story I wrote became a piece of healing, a small reclamation of the voice Claudia had tried to silence. I adopted a dog, a golden retriever that reminded me of Daisy. I named her Hope. She slept at my feet as I worked late into the night, a living reminder that love could survive cruelty. One quiet evening, I stood on the porch of my grandparents' house, the wind brushing against my face. I thought about my mother, about the child I had been, about the years of fear, hunger, and silence. And I realized something profound. I had survived. I had grown stronger because of it. I had become more than invisible. I am Elara Thompson. I am seen. I am heard. I am free. And this is only the beginning. No one, not Claudia, not her sons, not even my own father's inattention, could take that away from me. The world was wide, full of possibility, and for the first time I could step into it with confidence. I could choose my own path, follow my own dreams, and honor my mother's memory not with grief, but with life.